which will not be destroyed. Amen. So reads the word of the living God. Last week I began, when we were looking at the previous chapter, chapter 54, by introducing some of you to a chap from the 11th century, Bernard of Clairvaux. He was an 11th century abbot who established a monastery in Clairvaux, which is in France, and not in Luxembourg, as I thought it was last week, or at least when we were on holiday in Luxembourg and saw a Clairvaux and got really excited and then discovered it was the wrong one. But Bernard loved God, and the love of God and loving God was central to Bernard's whole understanding, really, of God in a very wonderful way. In fact, he wrote a marvelous treatise called On Loving God. And we sang one of his hymns last Sunday. And we sang it deliberately because it includes a line in there that's very intriguing, and it offers great hope to you and to me in our struggles and in our struggles as Christians. And it is the line, speaking of God, "To those who fall, how kind thou art." Simple line, profound truth. We live, as we saw and identified last week, very much in a culture that loves to cancel people if they misspeak or step out of line. But here Bernard of Clairvaux in that hymn was reminding us of what the Bible points us to, that to those who fall, how kind God is. To those who mess up. I wonder, as we sit here this morning or watch online, that's been your experience over this past week. Maybe even your experience today. Maybe there is a sense of inwardly, privately, no one else will know about it, deep shame and regret for things you've done or said or not done or not said. Well, last week we looked at this chapter 54, and this week we're going to look at chapter 55 of the prophecy of Isaiah. And these are two chapters that speak to us the basis on which Bernard Clairvaux could write those words. For here we see the heart of God to those who fall. And here we see how kind he is. The truth is, we all fall. We all sin. Matthew mentioned that in prayer. It's a reality of being human. It's not found in the Bible, but the well-known phrase, to err is to be human, is of course so very true. The Bible makes it clear, all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. That's me. That's you. And as a result of this, we rightly deserve his judgment. But the line in that hymn speaks about God being kind and not pouring out judgment and the full exercise of justice before his holy law upon us. Instead, it speaks of his kindness in his willingness and ability to forgive us and to restore us when we sin, when we fail. And there is a tension there, isn't there, that's baffled the minds of Christian thinkers over the centuries. It wouldn't be long after Bernard of Clairvaux had lived that there would be a mighty movement in Europe known as the European Reformation. And central to that was this big question: how in the world can God be kind to sinners and at the same time be just? Kindness is a wonderful thing. But when laws are broken, justice needs to be upheld. It's something we identify with straight away, isn't it? Imagine when you go home, and I really hope this isn't your experience, but when you go home from church this morning, you find somebody has burgled your house. And they've taken things which are most precious to you, not just of monetary value, but things that are of deep sentimental value, and they flog the lot of it, and you'll never see them again. The police catch up with them. And they're arrested. And they go to court. And I think, I don't know if you would, but I think I would. I'd want to turn up to see what's going to happen. The police took statements of you and others, and it's very clear case has been made, and the individual is brought in. And the prosecution make their case, the defense make their case, and then the judge says, well, have you got anything to say for yourself? Or something like that in a moment, a courtroom drama. And the fellow in the dock says, well, you know, I'm awfully sorry. I was having a terrible day. And there's a lot of difficult things going on in my life. And the judge sits there and he says, oh, do you know, I feel really sorry for you, mate. I tell you what, let's forget about the whole thing. I'm going to be kind to you. I don't know about you, but I'd be the one jumping up and down and saying, you know, what in the world's going on? He stole all my stuff. He's ruined, taken all those things that were so precious to me of memories and everything else. It's one thing to be kind, but where's justice? And that's the great dilemma, isn't it? That rooted great minds in the Reformation. How can God be kind to you and be just? How can he forgive and be holy? And the answer the Bible gives us is that there is a place, or as one modern hymn writer put it, where wrath and mercy meet. And that place is the cross. And it is at the heart of Christianity. It's the great thing that the love of God ultimately points to, and it is the place from which the kindness of God can flow, but it can only flow because justice is satisfied at the cross. For there on the cross, Jesus Christ, who is sinless, took to himself our sins, because he loves us. And he was punished, as Isaiah told us in the 53rd chapter, with the punishment we deserve. He took it instead of us. So it is in the cross that justice is satisfied. And it is from the cross and because of the cross that love flows and kindness flows. And so that means that when we sing and say and reflect and are comforted by the news that to those who fall, how kind thou art, speaking of God, it is the reminder that it is real, but it's not cheap. It cost Christ everything. Now, I don't know how familiar you are with the prophecy of Isaiah. It's a major book in the Old Testament. It's one of the major prophets. Major only in the sense that it's not more important than the other ones. It's just longer. That's why we use that word. But it was written to God's people, or a tribe of God's people, Judah, that really had become a kingdom in itself, who had done the unthinkable. To them had been given the promises of God, the law, the prophets, the examples again and again of God's faithfulness, and yet they made a decision over a period of time to abandon the living God and turn to idols of the nations around them instead. They put their trust in political and military alliances rather than in the living God. They provoked God. And yet in these two chapters we find, and in other parts of Isaiah and in other parts of the Old Testament, we find what flows from the heart of God towards his rebellious people is this repeated offer of restoration and forgiveness. Last week in chapter 54, we saw that God used two massive illustrations to highlight just how the depth of the problem that Judah was in. The first was an extended illustration, I don't know if you remember it, about really a woman, an elderly woman, looking back over her life and reflecting on all the regrets and all the shame of her life, which the chapter showed us were very deep. She was childless, and she'd been deserted in her youth by her husband. And there she is in her old age, coming face to face with unfulfilled dreams and deep pain. The other illustration was of a city. He called it an afflicted city, which was broken down by repeated fierce storms which had battered it, and now effectively was on the verge of being invaded by a more powerful force. But then we saw something outrageous, didn't we, in chapter 54? That to this woman, clearly distressed by the fact that she is childless, comes the instruction, sing, burst into song, shout for joy. You might say, what an outrageous thing to do. Don't you know the pain of infertility? Don't you know the deep emotional pressure of childlessness? The sadness that it brings? How dare God say something like that? Sing, burst into song, shout for joy. And to the afflicted cities, he simply says, I will build you. And there they are in their ruin, trembling and fearful. They're on the verge of being invaded by a superior military force. Tyranny will be far from you. Terror will be far removed. You might say, well, what are you talking about? We've got no defenses. We're massively outnumbered, outmaneuvered, outgunned. How can God say these things? Well, we saw, and I hope you remember, that this was part of God's way saying that when we write ourselves off, as we do, with him, it is not the end. And this is where the gospel takes us. God is kind to those who fall. The very fact of the cross is his response to us as humanity. That in our lostness, in our inability to understand his works and ways, let alone keep his laws, in all the chaos we pull down on ourselves as human beings, not only between the nations and in communities, but in our own lives and in our own relationships, all the deep sadness, the deep psychological distress, the terrible physical afflictions that we can know as human beings through illness and sickness. The cross ultimately is God saying, this is not the end. Darkness, sin, and evil, and wickedness, and suffering will not have the last word. This is where the gospel takes us. I think when people first heard those words from God through Isaiah, there may have been a sense where they said to themselves, well, how do we know we can really trust God in this? How do we know all this is really true? That here we are as a nation, pictured as an elderly woman, only with sorrow and regret, or deep, powerful, emotional, sad memories as she looks back over his life, and it looks like everything is finished, everything is over. She's past the age of childbearing, she's past the age of having a husband, she's on her own, she's just lonely and broken. How can we really trust God that this isn't the end? And he gives a little illustration. Back in chapter 54, verse 9, he says, it's like the days of Noah, when I swore that the waters of Noah would never again cover the earth, so now I have sworn not to be angry with you, never to rebuke you again. So just as there has never been a great catastrophic flood, you can be sure that what I'm saying to you about restoration is true. Now, what I want to ask this morning is a practical question. To those who kind, how good thou art. To those who fall, rather, how kind thou art. What does God's kindness look like to those who fall in real life? And how can we know the kindness of God? These are very practical questions, aren't they? And they're exactly where our chapter 55, takes us. Now, as I read chapter 55 to you, if you've been a Christian for a while, and you're fairly familiar with the Bible, there would have been verses that I was reading and you thought, I know that, I've heard that before. The very first verse, come all you who are thirsty, come to the waters, you have no money, come and buy. Or seek the Lord while he may be found. Call on him while he's near, verse 6. Or verse 9, as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than yours, and my thoughts than your thoughts. And verse 11, my word that goes out from my mouth will not return to me empty or void. These are well-known verses. They're kind of standalone verses, if you like. But all of these verses are found in this chapter. And it's not a collection of standalone verses, chapter 55 of Isaiah, but it is a message. It comes to us as a whole. And its message begins with a powerful invitation to you and to me, whoever we are, regardless of our situation or whatever condition we may be in. And the invitation is seen there in verse 1. Come, all you who are thirsty, come to the waters. And you who have no money, come buy and eat. Come buy wine and milk without money and without cost. Now, the first thing we can say about this invitation is that it is an attention-grabbing invitation. When somebody's inviting you to something that's really important or really fantastic, they tend to get a bit excited, don't they? Amazing, isn't it? I got 2 tickets for whatever, and I want you to come with me. There's a passion, there's an interest, there's an energy, there's an enthusiasm about it. And that's exactly what you see in the original language here. Because the first word of verse 1, we have the word come, is really a lot stronger than that. If you're familiar with the King James Version, it uses the word ho. It was a word that would be used in the marketplace to get someone's attention. We've got a great offer here. Fantastic, don't miss it. In the Hebrew, it's hoi. You can imagine that, can't you, in the markets? Hoi, hoi. We got 4 oranges for £2 or something like that. You know, it's a deal, it's a bargain, don't miss it. You know, that's what Isaiah is saying here. That's what God is saying here. He's adopting the posture of a street trader calling out, get our attention. This is a word to grab the attention of those who are covered in disgrace and shame because of sin and have written themselves off, who feel that there is no place for them anymore in the heart of God. That whatever they've done in life, whoever they are, whatever has happened has been so terrible. They are so mixed up, so complex. The issues are so dark that not even God can help. And it's to people like that God says, oi, come here, listen to me. When I first went to college, my big desire, I've been brought up in southwest London in a Welsh family, one of the big ambitions I had at that point in my life was to play rugby in Wales. It must be wonderful. And I went along to Llanelli Rugby Club. I trained with them midweek, and they said, well, turn up on Saturday and we'll give you a game. You're all right. I'd never played a game of senior rugby. It was always Colts rugby. This was going to be fantastic. I not only was going to play my first game of senior rugby, but I was going to be playing it in Wales for a Welsh team. We were playing Lloyd's Bank. I can remember it now. So it's marvellous. More do you want? I was so excited. So come Saturday, got my kit bag, made my way down to Llanelli and RFC, and I was promised a game. They put the team sheet up on the board. Now, I used to play tight head prop, number 3. And when I looked down the list of names, I came to number 3, and blow me, it wasn't my name. A.N. Other. I thought, who is this bloke? Who's this? And I was like, who's this? Who's A.N. Other? And well, nobody seemed to know. Although 1 or 2 did find it a little amusing, which was very frustrating to me. So I thought, oh, well then, that's me. They obviously had a rethink. I'm not good enough. I'll just have to stand on the sidelines and watch. And we were getting on the bus, and someone said, well, come on in. I said, well, what do you mean? You're playing, you idiot. But I'm not A.N. Other. Yes, you are. We didn't know your name. You're another. And in that moment, it was wonderful. It's a stupid illustration. It's a true story, but it's a stupid illustration. But it makes a point maybe for someone here this morning. We can be so full of expectation. You begin to hear the gospel, you begin to think, but then you really begin to discover your own heart. And where your real sin is and how dark it is, and the fact that your life is an offense to God. And you say, it's for other people. It's not for me. It's for the good people, the clean people. We write ourselves off. Isaiah 55 is God saying, get on the bus. It's for you. It's an invitation to you. It's an invitation to us all. The other thing about this invitation is it's very direct, isn't it? We have the word come 4 times in this passage. It's a very specific invitation. It's the invitation to all who feel spiritually dry, parched, worse than that, ashamed. Come all you who are thirsty. You know what it's like to be thirsty? You know what it's like to be absolutely exhausted through exercise, through sustained endurance exercise? You're just dreaming, the sun is streaming down, it's boiling hot, you're just longing for a drink. The invitation is a picture of how we are often before God because of our foolishness. It's the invitation to the spiritually bankrupt and powerless. You who have no money. You see, that's us, isn't it? We are the people who have so much and yet are always left thirsty for more in life. And we can never seem to find the more. We can't reach that far. We have no money for it. I was reminded this week of the American actor and comedian Jim Carrey, who once wrote, I think everyone should get rich and famous, and everyone should do whatever they dreamt of so that everyone can see it's not the answer. Powerful, isn't it? It's a direct invitation to us. In the emptiness, so often spiritual emptiness, and the hollowness of our souls. But it is a healing invitation. To those who are dying of thirst for spiritual reality and fulfillment, the invitation is, hey, come to the waters. Come to where you will find what you're really looking for. It's the invitation to those who are paralyzed by the poverty of their failure to find anything, and they have no resources, and say, I've been trying this, I've been trying that, I've been looking here and looking there and reading that book and going to this place and going down these different avenues, but I've come to the conclusion it's pointless. You who have no money, you come as well. You who are starving and malnourished, growing weaker in this world, come by and eat. You see, it's a generous invitation. Come to the waters. The Hebrew word that's used for waters here is usually used to describe the sea, or great big rivers, or floods. So what we're actually getting here, to those who feel so disappointed by life, and worse than that, disappointed by themselves because of their own failure, their own sins, and the realization that no matter how hard we try, we're never going to satisfy ourselves, and we simply know we don't have the right qualifications to just walk into God's presence as we are. The invitation, come to the waters, is more generous than we can ever imagine. For what the Lord is saying is, listen, I've got a little something that you can have a sip of, and you'll feel better. The point Isaiah is making, in the words that are used here, is that this is not an invitation to sip. This is an invitation to dive in. Dive in, drink, swim, live. Come by wine and milk. You're so thirsty, you're satisfied with water, but I've got a lot more for you than that. Oh, have the water, satisfy your thirst, then have the wine, have the milk. There is so much more here from God towards the repenting sinner who comes to him in faith than we can ever imagine. And you have no money. You say, I'm not good enough. I'm not the right person. I'm just not the sort of person to be a person of faith. Hey, you haven't got the money? It doesn't matter. Come, buy and eat. Receive. Everything here is for you. Friends, this ultimately is the invitation that Isaiah is speaking about, that has its fulfillment, its terminus in the invitation to come to Christ. There was a moment in Jesus' life when he stood up and he said to people, I am the bread of life. He who comes to me will never go hungry, and he who believes in me will never be thirsty. There's an amazing moment in Jesus' life when he takes a little detour out of Israel into Samaria, into a hostile territory. Samaritans and Jews hated each other. And he goes to a village called Sychar, and he meets a woman at the well. It's midday. It's a woman whose life is very chaotic, and there's a lot of pain in her life. And he begins to speak to her about who he is and what he's come to bring. And they're sat by a well, and the woman has gone there to draw water. And John in his gospel in chapter 4 records Jesus saying to this woman, and she's there with a water pot, and he sat by the well, everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again. But whoever drinks the water I give him will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give him will become in him a spring of water, welling up to eternal life. Now, what's fascinating about that incident is what happened next. What happened next was this. The woman said, give me this water, so I won't have to keep coming to this well every day in the heat of the day to drag the bucket up and fill the water pot and stick it on my head and lug it back to the house. She hadn't understood. Jesus isn't talking about physical water. He's talking about satisfying the deepest spiritual longings of the human heart. The essence of what drives us so often as human beings into many good things, the desire to know who we are. As we explore the world, the universe and science and all of those things, trying to make sense of it all. Schools of the philosophers doing the same things. But ultimately, it's all driven by the same thing. The desire for meaning. The desire to make sense of who I am in the world. And that desire, that quest for meaning just goes on and on as it's done through the centuries. And Jesus is saying, it's in me you find satisfaction. Why? Because on that cross, he is restoring the broken relationship between us as human beings and God. Nothing could be more clearer. He is bringing back together what in the fall in Eden was torn apart. It's a reasoned invitation as well, though, isn't it? Because in verse 2 he says, and it's the most logical question, why spend money on what is not bread and your labor on what does not satisfy? Why give your life pursuing things that in the end just lead you to realize that there's so much more to pursue? Why spend your money on things that ultimately don't feed your soul? And just in those two verses, we glimpse something of the heart of God. This glorious invitation to come and receive from him what we don't deserve. The magnitude of it, the depth of it. And then the logic. Why turn your back on this? Why keep on going after the other stuff? The counterfeit, the flawed, the stuff that in the end doesn't satisfy, when I've got this for you. You might find yourself saying, but how do I come then? This is great, this is a great offer, but how do I do it? How do I come to drink and receive and taste? How do I find my way back to God? And this takes us to another important word that Isaiah uses, and it's the word listen. Verse 2, listen. So important, he says it twice. Listen, listen to me. And eat what is good, and your soul will delight in the richest of fare. Give ear and come to me. Hear me, that your soul may live. Friends, restoration comes from listening to God, to paying attention to him. That might sound terribly simple, and in many ways it is, but it goes to the heart of our problems as human beings, because we shut God out with our talking. We love the sound of our own voices. Psalm 2 begins with these words, why do the nations conspire? The kings of the earth take their stand, the rulers gather together against the Lord and against his anointed one, that's Christ. Let us break their chains, they say, and throw off their fetters. They've got their ideas about God. He's restrictive, he's narrow. He wants to drag us down. He wants to spoil our joy. He wants to take away, and he wants us to kind of compress us into some dreadful conformity through fear and loathing and threatenings and slaughter and all the rest of it. And we fill our heads as human beings with these ideas. We fill our heads with the ideas that the best things in life are having your health and wealth, and that's it. And if you've got that, it's great. But oh, how temporary those things are, and how fleeting, and often how unsatisfying those things are. This address from God, this is an appeal from God to wayward people saying, look, if you want to come to the waters, you have to listen to me. And when we listen, what do we hear? We hear very simply an instruction. It's in verse 7. Let the wicked forsake his way, and the evil man his thoughts. Let him turn to the Lord, and he will have mercy on him. And to our God, for he will freely pardon. The wicked forsake their way, the evil man his thoughts. Wicked, evil ways. They're dreadful words, aren't they? They take us straight away to appalling things. We think of things like blasphemy and murder, extreme violence and abuse in all of its forms. Next Tuesday is World Holocaust Day. It marks the anniversary when the Red Army broke into Auschwitz and the horror was fully exposed to the civilized world of one of the most appalling atrocities in the Holocaust. Auschwitz was just one of 4 death camps, numerous concentration camps littering Eastern Europe and Germany. Awful, terrible things. And in our own day, last week, Iranian Revolutionary Guard slaughtering, it seems now, thousands of particularly young, unarmed protesters on the streets. We've seen and see regularly of the war in Ukraine and what's been going on in Gaza. We hear of world leaders oppressing their own people, threatening invasions. We read of the exploitation of the vulnerable, the weak, of children, the elderly, the persecution of Christians. Wicked and evil ways. But then there's my own heart and yours, which may seem a very long way from being a guard in Auschwitz during the Holocaust to where you are. Interestingly, I read a book over Christmas called A Passing Fury. It's written by a man called Andrew Williams, but not our Andrew Williams. He's a professor of law in a university in the UK, and he has written a fascinating book looking at the immediate attempts to prosecute those who were responsible for and participated in those evil and horrific events in the Holocaust. In the book, he visits certain sites and then connects what happened with the trials afterwards. But in the book, he raises the question, but what is evil? No one would disagree A man like Kramer, who was one of the commandants in Birkenau, Auschwitz-Birkenau, and latterly in Belsen. British troops arrived. He showed them round Belsen as if it was perfectly normal, as it was in his distorted, evil mind. He thought the whole thing was perfectly understandable. He believed that. You look at a man like that and you say he's evil. In his own trial, actually, in the end, that's what his wife said about him. It's what got him convicted and then hanged. But the writer of that book, which I read, said, but what about those who knew, in the rest of Germany particularly, who knew what was happening and did nothing, who chose to look the other way? Is that not also evil? Evil is a complex word, as is sin. There are shades and varieties. And all of our hearts and all of our lives are touched by evil and wickedness to one degree or another. But if you're going to come to the waters, if you're going to enjoy what God has in store, you need to listen. And central to what he's saying, he is saying to you and he's saying to me, let the wicked forsake his way and the evil man his thoughts. Turn from that. It's what the Bible and theologians talk of as repentance. Walk away from it. Turn away from it. Isaiah puts it in these words, doesn't he? Let him turn to the Lord. You say, if I'm really honest before God about some of the things I've thought about some people and some of the things I've said in the quietness of my own heart and some of the things I've wanted with my own hungers and desires and lust, I don't think I could look God in the face. It's just too terrible a thought. But here Isaiah says, if you forsake your ways, what will happen? What will you get from the Lord? He will have mercy on you. He will freely pardon. Oh, I know all about that. I know what you thought. I knew what you felt. And I will freely pardon you. You say, how can that be? How can such an invitation be like that? Isn't this the problem with Christianity? It makes all these claims, but in the end, come on, it's beyond the realms of reason. How could God ever have mercy on somebody perhaps who'd been a guard in a concentration camp? You say it's a terrible thing. How could God have mercy on a member of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard murdering innocent people in the streets? How could God have mercy on me? Verse 8 and 9. My thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. What is he saying there? He's saying, I'm not like you. I'm not like you. And the proof that I'm not like you for us is that 2,000 years ago, he put his own son on the cross of Calvary, that we might receive mercy and be freely pardoned. Listen to him. This is what he's saying to you and saying to me and to every human being. That in our feelings have been empty in this life, of wanting all the time and not receiving, our feelings have been just overrun by life. Fear of the future, fear of others, fear of ourselves. Come to me. Come to me as you are. Come and receive what you're longing for. For only Christ can satisfy the longings of the human heart. Augustine of Hippo, one of the greatest theologians of the Christian church, for much of his early life he lived as what we would call a playboy. He had it all. Sex was a massive thing in his life. He lived for what he wanted. He'd go out and get it and indulge in it. And then he reflects on the wonderful change that God brought in his life through listening to a man called Ambrose preaching and arguing with philosophers and showing the philosophers the purity of Christian gospel. And he came to faith in him. And later on in his life, he wrote a book. It's called The Confessions. And it's a prayer, but it's a testimony at the same time. So he talks about his life and all of his struggles, but it's in the form of a conversation with God. In the very first paragraph, he writes this: "Our hearts are restless until they find their rest in you, O Lord." And that's exactly what Isaiah 55 is saying. That's what I'm saying to you today, that the restlessness, the deep spiritual restlessness will just go on and on and on until you listen and you turn and you forsake and you turn to Christ and find in him the mercy of God and his freely pardoning us. You see, we hear all this through the Word of God. And it's actually, as we come to close here this morning, it's what Isaiah keeps pointing us back to in his prophecy, isn't it? The Lord gives an illustration that we can all relate to. At verse 10 it is, "As the rain and snow come down from heaven," we had quite a bit of that this weekend, haven't we? Well, rain certainly. "As the rain and snow come down from heaven and do not return to it," the water cycle for those who are interested, "without watering the earth and making it bud and flourish, so that it yields seed for the sower and bread for the eater, so is my word that goes out from my mouth." He's saying, just look at the natural world. We call it the water cycle, okay? The clouds condense, the water comes down in the form of rain, it goes into the ground, it causes the crops to grow so that we can have food and live. And then there's evaporation and it goes back and it keeps going round. It's all there. And he says, just like that, so is my word. It comes down from heaven that you might have life. Jesus is the bread of life. He is the living water to produce life in you and me, that our praise might ascend back into heaven for his name and his glory. And that's why he says in verse 10, "My word will not return to me void," or my word will not return to me empty. So it's not like the rain coming down and doing nothing on the dry ground. But it will accomplish what I desire and achieve the purpose to which I sent it. And I wonder this morning, what is Isaiah 55, this ancient document, doing in your heart this morning? The word of God has gone out. Will it return empty? Or perhaps in you this morning there has been a sense that you are hearing the voice of God through this passage. What's it like for those who in the end accept the invitation and come? What is it like? And Isaiah is bursting to tell us, and he finishes with these words in verses 12 and 13. He says, if you come, if you drink, if you take, you will go out in joy, he says, and be led forth in peace. The mountains and hills, it's poetry, the mountains and hills will burst into song before you. Trees of the fields will clap their hands. You're doing the whole creation is delighting and affirming what you're doing if you respond to Christ. Instead of thorn bush, you had enough of the thorn bush? We'll grow the pine tree. And instead of the briars that ensnare us, the myrtle will grow. And this will be for the Lord's renown an everlasting sign which will not be destroyed. Taste and see that the Lord is good. We're going to sing to close this service this morning. We're going to sing the hymn, "Come, let us sing of a wonderful love." It includes this verse, "Jesus is seeking the wanderers yet, why do they roam? Love only waits to forgive and forget. Home, weary wanderer, home." We'll stand and